Let's take a look at a recent example of how this can play out without guardrails. I present to you the Queen James Bible. Published in 2012, the Queen James Bible arose from a simple premise voiced by its anonymous editors. Mainstream English Bibles, especially the King James tradition, were being used to justify what they called homophobic interpretations. Their solution was not a study apparatus or a pastoral commentary, but an edited text of the King James Version itself, retitled as Queen James. Its aim was to make scripturally based condemnations of same-sex relations impossible or at least far less straightforward. The project's website states the goal plainly. The Queen James Version is the King James Bible edited to resolve interpretive ambiguity in key passages regarding homosexuality. In practice, the editors targeted a small set of famously contested passages, like Genesis 19 verse 5, Leviticus 18:22, Leviticus 20 verse 13, Romans 1:26 through 27, 1 Corinthians 6 verse 9, 1 Timothy 1 verses 10, and Jude verse 7, and altered the biblical lines rather than merely annotating them. Typical changes include adding clarifying words or reframing phrases so that the focus shifts from the same-sex acts per se to violence, idolatry, or cultic abuse. The public rationale often repeated around the project claims that the word homosexual is a modern insertion, first appearing in 1946 in an English Bible, and that the Queen James Version therefore removes what they believe to be misinterpretation by tightening the wording in a way which favors their intended aim. Now, whether one finds the methods compelling or not, the method or idea itself is clear. Edit the verse itself to foreclose a disfavored reading and footnote the rationale. Reception of the Queen James Bible was swift and polarized. Christian outlets critical of the project framed it as advocacy editing, which is an attempt to re-engineer scripture to fit a predetermined ethic, using the editor's own language as evidence, as they admit the version is edited to prevent homophobic misinterpretation. Some commentators have also highlighted the rhetorical strategy of renaming the King James Version to the Queen James Version, seeing it as branding that signals the intended audience as much as the editorial philosophy. More sympathetic popular pieces treat the Queen James Version as a cultural artifact, part provocation, part pastoral gesture, arguing that every English translation involves some degree of interpretive judgment, so an overtly inclusive edition is unsurprising in today's marketplace. But even granting that point, responsible translation operates within the boundaries set by the original languages and the historical evidence. The Queen James Version goes a step further by modifying a small set of verses so that certain readings become impossible. Whether praised or criticized, virtually all observers have to concede that fact. If a change cannot be defended from the vocabulary, grammar, and context of the source text, or from established ancient usage, it's no longer translation, it's outright revision. The Queen James Version functions as a case study in translation ethics. It illustrates that translation is interpretation, and editorial choices can catechize readers. When the solution to disputed exegesis is to rewrite primary lines of the text to block an unwelcome conclusion, we have left ordinary translation and entered into programmatic revision. That's why many Protestant translation committees, precisely because they want fidelity, will signal disagreements in footnotes, not by redrafting the base text. That shared instinct, whatever one's moral stance, explains why the King James Version is often cited in discussions of how, or rather how not, to handle contested passages, in a way that keeps the Bible a text to be translated, not a position paper to be engineered. When accountability is surrendered, translation loosens into advocacy editing. The Queen James Bible is just the most overt recent example, but it's not hard to imagine a nationalist Bible trimming commands to love the foreigner, an antinomian Bible softening moral imperatives with easy qualifiers, or a prosperity Bible changing verses warning about wealth to merely warnings of excessive or uncharitable wealth. At that point, translation becomes rebranding. The Bible fractures into niche products and the authority of Scripture is outsourced to marketing. The potential for abuse is real. And the church's answer isn't censorship. It's orthodox, accountable translation, a refusal to let fashion, faction, or funding rewrite the church's Bible. Guardrails protect readers from being catechized by editorial fiat and protect translators from pressure to make Scripture say what works. If translation is powerful enough to catechize, it's serious enough to supervise. If you find the Queen James approach troubling, you already share the church's instinct. Guardrails protect Scripture from being conscripted by the age, whatever the age's cause. So jumping back to the main point, from the Vulgate to vernacular preaching and household prayer and on to approved translations for private reading, the church's behavior makes sense only if her intent has always been both access and fidelity. Scripture in the language people actually use, and translations that hand on the apostolic faith rather than rewrite it. If you drop access, then Scripture becomes a museum piece, protected and polished but unheard. Drop fidelity and Scripture becomes a mirror, endlessly reflecting the reader's preferences. The Catholic Church keeps these together, freedom with form and intelligibility with integrity. And that's why the popular premise, the Catholic Church kept the Bible from the people fails logically. A church that created a vernacular Bible, kept translating into the people's tongues as languages changed, and insisted on responsible oversight isn't hiding the word. She's guarding its meaning through the ages. To say it another way, the church's stewardship isn't stinginess, it's care. Parents who lock up rat poison from their children aren't hoarding rat poison so much as they are protecting the children. Likewise, the church's concern is that the label on the medicine, so to speak, be honest. We can accept different fonts and reading levels. We can't accept a label that subtly redefines the active ingredient or alters warning labels to sell a different outcome. Orthodox translations can sound like spin if you assume orthodoxy means forcing doctrine onto the text. But orthodoxy is a boundary drawn by the text itself as received in the church. It marks off what Scripture will bear and what it won't. An Orthodox translator isn't free to flatten every rough edge or smuggle in a private theory. Within those boundaries, translators still make hundreds of honest choices, some more literal, some more idiomatic, some explaining in notes, others in introductions. Variety remains. The difference is that variety is tethered to a rule of faith rather than to an editor's agenda. This protects readers, who deserve to meet Scripture, not a curated reinterpretation. This also protects translators, who deserve the backing of a community that says, "We'd rather be faithful than fashionable." And it protects the common life of the church, because public worship and catechesis need stable reference points to form a people together rather than scatter them by preferences. Translators can prefer formal or dynamic equivalents, but they may not edit away the faith the text confesses.